Hey Wargamers, welcome back to another While You're Reforging, my show where I just talk for a bit while y'all get some painting and hobbying done. And today we're going to continue our exploration of this particular episode edition of White Dwarf magazine. This is White Dwarf 251 from December here in the States. And we began talking about Luther Hess as well as the introduction to whatever giant model they were releasing this particular season. And we're going to continue our storytelling by talking about Karak 8 Peaks, the kind of, I guess, center point of civilization for the goblins, so to speak. And then also talking about the named character Bathsazar Gelt, which is fun because not only will I talk about him in the old world with his original lore, but then also talk about how he has appeared in Age of Sigmar, as a little Easter egg / spoiler for some cool book. One thing I want to say up top here is that if you're enjoying these videos and you just want to leave some feedback, please let me know. Like, this is the kind of content that is very easy for me to produce, and I really do enjoy it. I love just telling stories and hanging out with you guys while you paint. So if you're enjoying this, please let me know in the comments down below or with a thumbs up on the video. I need those things to be able to understand what to create. But with all of that out of the way, let's head back down to the downward cam and we're going to talk about some stories. I hope that you have some paints and some models to work on, or you're building something, and we're going to have a great time just talking about Warhammer history. So here we are, The Fall of Karak 8 Peaks by Space James McQuark, which is, I don't know how they figured out my stripper name, but you know, whatever. Now, you're going to have to forgive me on this one. I do need to have my little piece of paper here to guide my thing. Because of the nature of recording in this camera, I'm actually like way further back than I would normally be if I was reading this, so I hope it doesn't distract you too much, but it helps me not get my words crossed. Snicket ducked as the cannonball thundered in the rock face, inches above his head. Shards of granite scattered through the air. Under the light of the full moon, he could clearly make out thousands of dark-robed goblins moving like shadows through the steep valley. "Boss, are you sure this cunning plan of yours is gonna work?" he whined, brushing a thick layer of dust off his black robes. "That wall looks pretty thick and I don't think we is gonna get over it, even without those stunties shooting stuff at us." His words were drowned out by a scream that was half terror and half delight. A goblin doom diver sailed over their heads, catapulted high into the night air towards the thick walls of the dwarf stronghold. The solid dwarf bastion was dotted with small indentations from other doom divers' failed attempts at flight, and yet, much to the amusement of Snicket, a long queue of enthusiastic goblins still stretched back quite some distance. Along the length of the east wall of the hold, siege machines covered the flat granite surface, like vines. From this distance, the goblins manning the towers were just small specks. Occasionally a ladder would be raised and the goblins would begin to scale it. Each time the defenders appear at the top of the wall and send the ladder and the unfortunate goblins crashing back to the ground. But for each ladder they felled, another would take its place. The siege of Karak 8 Peaks had reached a horrible stalemate, and at some point soon one army would have to give. Countless numbers of goblins scurried to and fro. Somewhere amongst the sea of greenskins, grot bag dung breath, which let's just throw that name out there as best name in Warhammer, hoped that the war bosses were keeping some kind of order amongst the thousands of Gobbos that had converged in the pass. It was hard enough keeping his own small tribe under command, let alone coordinating the attack of a dozen or so tribes. He'd already seen the Black Fangs let a hail of arrows loose on the Broken Tooth tribe. Fortunately, most of the goblins seemed intent on killing the dwarves, and the army's formation was holding. Admittedly, not holding in tightly knit formations or organized ranks, but the fact that they were facing the right way was as good a sign as any. "Snicket, me old mate," said Grotbag, grasping his companion tightly by the throat. "Now is not the time to question me, right?" The goblin war boss let go of his banner bearer. "De Rat Fing said he'd be here, and be here he'd better be." Grotbag was beginning to have doubts himself. Those Skaven hated dwarves almost as much as the Gobbos did, but he knew better than to trust them. Their leader had made a deal with Grotbag that would sort out those dwarfs forever. But while Grotbag's boys were getting blown to smithereens, the rats were nowhere to be seen. "He's probably skulking down some comfy hole munching on some cheese," the goblin mused to himself. As the bitter thought of betrayal crossed the goblin general's mind, he heard a loud cheer go up from the goblin throng. From the arrow slits and windows in the walls of the hold, he could make out a strange gas escaping. It was putrid green in color, thick and noxious, Even the goblin's general could smell it from a good distance away. More and more of the foul fumes poured from the hole. The Skaven had done it. They had penetrated the lower levels and released poison gas just as planned. I knew old Scarclaw wouldn't let us down. I knew I could depend on dem rats. The goblin general waved his sword high in the air. "Wait for my signals, boys, wait for it," Grotbag hollered above the chanting mass of elated goblins. The green gas was now beginning to seep over the top of the stronghold, and as he spoke, he could see dwarves flinging themselves from the parapets, falling to their doom, seemed preferable to suffocation and poisoning amongst the choking fumes. The goblin army was on the verge of storming the fort, and the bosses were desperately trying to hold the lions back. Slowly, the stronghold doors opened, and it was for a moment he'd been waiting for. The dwarves were unable to stay within the thick walls of the hold. He knew the dwarves too well. They would rather die fighting than choke to death in the thick, noxious gases. "Charge! Get 'em, lads! We'll be roasting stunties before dawn!" With a high-pitched roar, the whole goblin army charged forward. Thick ranks of spears closed in upon the dwarves, and the moon disappeared, obscured by missile fire from hundreds of night goblins that lined the slopes of the mountain pass. The first wave of night goblins hit the dwarf formation, but the dwarves were disciplined troops, and Grotbag was dismayed to see his attack faltering. Wave after wave of goblins smashed against the solid shield wall of the dwarves, only to be cut down in a mere matter of seconds. These stunties were resolute in their defense of their hold, and what should have been a great goblin victory was slowly turning into a slaughter. Looking for his best shaman, Grotbag spied the tall, brightly colored hat of the strange goblin in the center of a unit of boys. Making his way towards them, he pushed through the dense ranks of troops between them. Snicket ran behind him, proudly waving the battle standard before him. Fazbang the shaman, which Fazbang is the best name ever, had spent the last few hours gathering a personal retinue of night goblin fanatics, but instead of fighting at the front of the goblin attacking force, they stood gibbering together at the rear of the army. "What's going on?" Grotbag growled as he eventually reached the shaman. "You said we easily smashed through those dwarves." He could sense a goblin retreat was imminent. Already he'd spied some fleeing the field of battle, and, to be quite honest, the way things were going, he was tempted to follow. "And so we shall. See these?" Fitzbang calmly replied. The shaman pulled out a handful of mushrooms from a small pouch. Their caps sparkled with a golden glow in the dark night. One by one, Fazbang handed them out to the select few of goblins who had gathered around him, each taking one and carefully nibbling on it. "What's dem?" Snicket asked, pointing at the glowing fungus which the shaman was carefully placing back in his pouch. "Wait and see," replied the shaman, pointing to the goblins who had eaten them. Snicket raised a puzzled brow. The fanatics picked up their heavy metal balls, which were attached to each goblin by means of a short length of chain. As they passed through the crowded troops, Snicket noticed that the other Gobbos were quickly making their way for them, and within a matter of seconds they had reached the front line. Then he realized why such a wide berth had developed. They began to swing their balls, and before long the momentum combined with their weight of the balls sent the crazy goblins hurtling towards the spinning... Let me read that one again here. Sent the crazy goblins hurtling forward, spinning towards the dwarfs' defensive formations. Foam drooled from their mouths, and their maniac cackles sent a shiver down Snarsik's spine. Most of them were cut down by crossbow bolts, but a couple hit the solid line and sent fragments of shields, helmets, and dwarf flesh flying through the cold open night. Just 2 single crazed goblins had punched a small hole in the defensive line, but it was enough. Seeing the gap in the formation, and the goblins of the Crooked Moon tribe launched a full-scale charge. Before the dwarves could close up the hole in their defensive position, the goblins had broken through. The rest of the green horde was soon crashing against the dwarf line. In a brief moment, the stout defenders were overcome. Each dwarf was skewered by dozens of sharp spear points. Engulfed by the sheer number of attackers, the brave dwarves stood little chance. The gates to Karak 8 Peaks stood open to the whole goblin horde. Regiment after regiment of greenskins poured through the gigantic archway to plunder the citadel. Hours after the battle, Grotbag could see and hear the screams of dwarfs as they were hideously tortured by his boys. The fumes that had dissipated quickly, and Grotbag now sat upon the king's throne in the great hall. All around the hall, goblins had gathered, and at his left stood a small number of Skaven. These were the Skaven Seer's Guard, whom he had already reached an agreement with. The Skaven could keep the possession of the lower mines, whilst the Night Goblins would take command of the stronghold itself. Grotbag had little trust of the devious Skaven would keep their word, but he had plans to deal with them too. Before long, Karak 8 Peaks would belong to the Goblins, and the Goblins alone. Tonight, though, united in a glorious victory, the two races drank together. It was a night to celebrate. Boys, Gobbos, and Ratfings, lend me your ears. At this, a number of necklaces, each made with grisly trophies of dwarf victims, were hurled towards him. Grotbag continued, I tell you, today is a great day for the Gobbos, and we kick them stunties out of a mountain tower. Tomorrow, we'll kick them off the face of the world. But tonight, let's feast. With his victory speech over, Grotbag jumped from the throne and made his way to the cellars where the banquet was being prepared. He grabbed the shaman as he passed him. Fazbag, me old mate, do you know what I fancy to eat? Grotbag looked at Grotbag suspicious. No, what boss? Grotbag snatched the small pouch from around Fangbag's neck. Dwarfs and mushroom stew. Now, this is a super fun story here because, one, it's the fall of Karak 8 Peaks, a very, important location in the old world for the dwarves. Karak, of course, being a dwarven stronghold, but they always had this built-in animosity towards goblins and Skaven. And I feel like in Age of Sigmar, they've definitely turned it to be more versus the Skaven. There's a lot more Skaven versus KO or Skaven versus Fire Slayers type stories. I don't feel like there's nearly as much Gloomspite gets, although it does come up every once in a while. I like this one, first of all. A lot of great names. If you are trying to build an army, looking at some of these old white dwarves is a great resource for names, because right off the bat, we've got, Grotbag Dung Breath, we've Space James McQuirk, whatever, I like that one a lot. Fazbang the Shaman, there's a bunch of cool things here. And really what they're illustrating is this is the story for, as we go to the next one here, the Bloody Spear Tribe. And so this is essentially trying to introduce us to a particular Night Goblin army. So let's talk about this here. So collecting goblin armies in Warhammer. And so this is again really focused on goblins because remember they used to be orcs and goblins was one book. So this was like, hey, if you want to have a theme army that eliminates orcs completely from the equation, this is how you could do it. And isn't it so cute? Just these, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 units makes an entire army? That's adorable. Games Workshop, you guys learned how to make money since then. Goblins don't always fight alongside the larger orcs. Jake Thornton explains how you can take a Gobbo-only force to the battlefield. Of course, we have Gloomspite Gits, which is that exact concept, but it's so fun to go back in time and see basically what their thought process is as we look at some of these things. Tell someone who's never fought against goblins that you have an army of the little green skins, and they'll probably give you the indulgent smile normally reserved for novice opponents. That is some shade. It's funny how opinions change after a game or two. For all their lack of height and bravery, the simple fact that goblins outnumber their many foes by several to one makes them an army to contend with. Of course, they are prone to running away a lot, but that needn't be the end of it, as there are always loads more to push forward, no matter how serious the casualties. In the Orcs and Goblins army book, I've included a few variant army lists for the more adventurous of you. Amongst these are two shown here. One for Night Goblin tribes and the other for common Gobbos. These aren't to simulate great wars like that of Skarsnik and the Night Goblin warlord who keeps dwarfs bottled up in the Karak 8 Peats. By the time an army has grown that large, its original tribe is one of many of a great army. That is what the main list is for, and this is the kind of army that most people use, one with a little bit of everything. The appendix army lists are there to restrict some of that choice but add character to the army, but it's not just restrictions. Choices have been moved from special to core, rare to special. Basically, they're messing with army construction of how you can make a super fun all-grut based army. And he goes over, I'm not going to go into it too much because it's a lot of talking about force organization in fantasy battles, but the way it used to work, for those of you who are uninitiated, is you had so much core of your army, and that would be things like your general troops. Certain special rules or sub-factions could turn various units into core, but we would call them battle line. You have to have so many battle line. Then based on the size of the game, a percentage of your list could be things like rare units or elite, that kind of deal. And basically this is just ways of tweaking an existing army list to make that work as much as possible. Now there's still some cool things we can sort out here. For example, I want to learn about Skarsnik here, Warlord of the 8 Peaks. Of all the goblin warlords that ever lived, Skarsnik is perhaps the most famous. Apart from the fat one, that is, meaning, is it Grom the Paunch? Is that his name? Give me a little piece of paper out here. Anyway, Skarsnik is the warlord of the Crooked Moons tribe of night goblins, the most powerful of such tribes in the southern part of the World Dead Mountains. The surrounding goblin tribes, and even the most of the orcs, acknowledge his overlordship of the area of control of the Karak 8 Peaks. Unfortunately, the dwarves disagree and have reclaimed part of their citadel where they now hold out. Surrounded and besieged, but very much determined not to lose their ancestral homeland. When Skarsnik goes to war, he can muster a vast army of orcs and goblins to his cause, as well as his pet cave squig, Gobla. In game terms, Skarsnik's big army would have best been generated using the main army list, meaning the orcs and goblins battle tome or whatever, a night goblin warlord as your general. Well, that's what you'll be doing until we get around putting his rules on our coming website, whitedwarf.com. That's right, all the special characters that we've made models for in the past but haven't been able to fit into new books are going to be put on our website. Wow, what a revolutionary idea, guys. Buckle up. Games Workshop is going to start putting rules on the internet, the series of tubes that everybody has access to. And then over here, he kind of gives us, like, if you're trying to create a night goblin focused army, just units to kind of stick to. So you got night goblins, snotling swarms, which we don't really have anymore, but they're just like the most diminutive of all greenskin types, even smaller than goblins. We would know this as Gloomspite Gits with a whole bunch of Stabbas and or Shootas, and as well as splashing in some, let's see, we got Squig Herds, that's definitely a thing that's still around, Stone Trolls, Giants, what are they called? Berserkers? That they're called, the guys with the big chain balls. So like this army like still totally checks out, which is like a really cool thing. I like it quite a bit. And so here we have the Bloody Spear tribe. That's not his thing, is it? No, he's Crooked Moon. Okay, so this is just a generic sort of goblin tribe. And then over here we have the Broken Axe tribe, common goblin army. So this would be a big mix of things. And we have, what is this here? Goblins, wolf riders, of course, because they, I don't know if you know this, before it was all squigs all the time. They used to incorporate other forms of cavalry into their army, which, I mean, when you have squigs, why would you ever choose wolves? Let's be honest. I understand Games Workshop's decision there. But yeah, snotling swarms, wolf chariots, which I don't know why we don't have squig chariots. It seems like a missed opportunity. And then everything, all the weird stuff. So giants, snotling pump wagons, which is a unit that I never fully understood the purpose of. Like, what is it shooting? Can someone tell me? Do they like pump it like a like old blacksmith things with the big like cranking, I don't know, accordion looking things? Rock lavas, which is basically just a catapult. Doom divas, which is the thing that's mentioned in the story, and I love how they highlighted that. So a doom diva is basically you take a grot, give him a spear and some fake wings, you put him on a catapult and you shoot him. And so I'm looking to see, oh yeah, here he is up here on the top left. He just has these little like paper wings that they put him on. And the idea is if we can throw enough of them up against the wall, either A, that's distracting the enemy so you can throw ladders up and besiege them at the same time, or B, ideally, you throw enough of them up there and they go full like Squig Team 6 and open the main door, and so the army can go. It's basically, life is so cheap in this faction that they're willing to just literally throw them at the wall like spaghetti to see what works. And like they're so enthusiastic about it, and I love it. We can also see in the pictures here they have swamp trolls, which of course we have great models for now. And all in all, I'm not gonna lie, this makes me want to do a Gloomspite Gits army. Also, it makes me want to redo all of my bases to Goblin Green, which I'm sure is infuriating to many people, but I'm just dumb enough to do it. And you know, I like these kinds of things. Like, I feel like these, you know, I mentioned in my last video as we were talking earlier in the book how much White Dwarf has changed, how it used to have a lot of extra rules for you, and you know, yeah, they had an expiration date, so to speak, but they also cost you almost nothing besides the cost of the magazine. And I like this kind of stuff. I do think there's more of a digital component that could be introduced, as evidenced by their thrilling announcement of free rules on the interwebs. But overall, I think it's a really cool thing. This is the kind of article I do think we still see quite a bit of, though. Like, when I look at the more recent ones, a lot of times it's Tale of Four Warlords does something very similar of like, here's what I was going for, right? I wanted to build a bloody spear tribe. This is what I went for. In the same vein, it's like they had, just the same guy doing that, just do a second one, the Broken Axe tribe. There's just a lot of cool different ways they can go. So I feel like this kind of article where, we have a cool story, obviously, that gives us some context. It puts a lot of the units that you see here in context, like the Doom Divers, the teeming hordes of stuff. They don't really mention Wolf Riders here at all, to be honest with you. I mean, they mention like cavalry, but that's not really much. Like, they didn't go into detail about the Wolf Riders, but they did go into detail about the fanatics getting mushrooms and being, lit to high heaven as they go charging in full speed. I like that quite a bit. If there was a bowl that was dwarf and mushroom stew that they made, I'd say slide it over. Go to Flavor Town with Guy Fieri style. But overall, I like this kind of article. Now, what we're going to do at this point, I want to highlight, again, this is my talking while I just kind of show off a few things while y'all are painting. Here we have our, I guess, collection of what orcs could look like. It's a painting contest, but I like the fact that they chose some very different schemes. Everything from down here, where he's painted almost like a bone splitter, where half his face is red, almost like there's war paint on him. I like that quite a bit. Everything from classic metallics, silver, bronze type. Here we have a red painted armor, which is real cool. Obviously, it's not all orcs, but it seems to be the general theme. I think this is probably not terribly long after whatever starter box this was that came with these orcs that are all in the same basic pose. There was another story that I wanted to touch on, and before I get quite there, here's a great one on how to build trees and stuff. Interesting. So I like this one because, first of all, Games Workshop doesn't do a ton of do-it-yourself tutorials anymore. They, of course, rather sell you a set of trees, which makes sense into their bigger business model scheme, but I do like the idea of a nice little quick shopping list here. I actually might try these. Let me know in the comments down below, would you be interested in me seeing if I could build terrain based on their tutorials here? It's one of those things, like, it would only cost like a couple bucks. It wouldn't take tremendously a lot of work, but it'd be time. And so at this point, I'm gonna take a quick pause, get some water, but we're going to hammer into Bathsazar Gelt, a character that I am very excited to talk about here today. So yeah, let's start digging into the story of the man himself, Bathsazar Gelt. I only knew him a little bit from the old world, so this is actually quite new to me. It looks like we just have a blurb, a story, which we will read, and then this is actually a totally separate article talking about the role of heroes in fantasy battles, which I actually do want to read because, quite honestly, it feels like they have such a design change from Fantasy Battles to Age of Sigmar. And I don't mean design change. Obviously, the rules are super different. None of they don't work. But what I more mean is like a focus on how heroes interact with an army, how much of an army they take up. Obviously, now we have these big centerpiece models like Nagash and Alariel. It's just different. So let's talk about that. So let's go back to Bathsazar Gelt first, the Supreme Patriarch, which is also my nickname, by the way. Bathsazar Gelt made his first appearance in the busy port of Marienburg, having bought passage on a merchant ship coming from his native Black Gulf. As he had paid for the journey with gold, which he had transmuted himself, Balthazar left for Altdorf quickly before the effects wore off. The colleges of magic were his destination, which I love that. He's a hero who'd like, here's some fake gold, and it reverts back to whatever it was before. That's awesome. Since his early years, Balthazar had always been fascinated by alchemy, inspired by the science of the transmutation of metal, and especially by the mystic search for the Philosopher's Stone. To turn vile metals into the noblest of all, pure gold, had always been an obsession for Balthazar. Driven by this powerful force and sustained by a natural talent for manipulating the energies of the winds of magic, Balthazar soon rose in the ranks of the Gold Order of Magic. In Altdorf, he spent many years studying and experimenting on how to combine the art of alchemy with the magic of metals. His inquisitive intelligence and open-minded approach made Balthazar quite popular with the Alchemist Guild, and even among the engineers who benefited from his research into new types of black powder. One day, a freak accident in his laboratory almost killed him, and since that day, he always appears in public completely covered in his elegant robes and wearing a golden mask. Rumors abound concerning the reason for this unusual habit. Some say his entire skin turned to gold, and others swear that he is horribly disfigured, but nobody knows exactly what happened to him. One thing is sure, the accident did not reduce his will to succeed in his research, nor did it hamper his powers. On the contrary, he has risen to the position of Supreme Patriarch of the College of Magic, defeating Thyrus Gorman in the ritual duel and replacing him in prominence of the Bright Order with his beloved gold. From that day on, the winds of power have blown strong for the magic of metals, and a new Supreme Patriarch riding a Pegasus surrounded by a golden halo has appeared on many battlefields where the Emperor's troops are fighting. Now, again, haven't read the story here quite yet, but I like this introduction. You have somebody who is a good combination of, he's noble, I mean, he wants to be a part of society and build things up or whatever, but he's not above the dastardly manipulations like turning crappy metals into gold, buying passage for something, and then disappearing before the effects wear off is just, I like it. But overall, we have a researcher whose, I guess, efforts, the fruits of his labor are benefiting many different aspects of the Empire's armies. Already cool. As far as what happened to his face, I don't know, but I feel like when the designers made this model or came up with the idea of Bathsazar Gelt, I feel like that's when the first seeds of the Stormcast Eternals were created. I mean, they just, with their expressionless golden masks for the most part, obviously they can be whatever color you want, but I just feel like there's a lot of inspiration from that. In fact, my buddy Jack from Early Ones, he used a Balthazar Gelt head or something like some bit of his on, I think, a Cities of Sigmar conversion because of that, because in his story he was trying to emulate the Stormcast that are walking alongside them, and it fits flawlessly with the theme. So let's go over our story here. Thyrus Gorman was confident. He had won the ritual duel for the last 3 times in succession, and his powers were stronger than ever. His mastery of the fiery element was unmatched. Clad in the red robes of his order, Thyrus was wearing all the symbols of his position as Master of the Bright College and Supreme Patriarch. Standing almost 7 feet tall, hands on the hilt of his magic sword, Thyrus was an imposing figure. He was ready, on the same ritual position of the ruling patriarch in the great hall of the duels. The huge chamber was shaped like an 8-sided prism. The thick walls of the ceiling and the floor were made of gloss-smooth obsidian. That black stone was the bane of magic, totally refractory and inactive. Thyrus could feel his powers dimmed by the presence of such, and it was all around him. Forgive me, I need to adjust here because this text has like a picture in the background and it makes it just a bit hard to read. Under the symbol of their own wind of magic, the masters of the other orders were standing in alcoves carved in the 8 walls protected by powerful enchanted barriers. Replacing the Patriarch in the position of College of Fire was Hans Fjorbak, Thyrus' most gifted apprentice. The Obsidian Chamber and the presence of the 8 most powerful wizards in the Empire were necessary to contain the powers that the 2 contestants would soon unleash. After all, the winner of the duel would gain the title of Supreme Patriarch for the next 8 years. The objective of the challenge was to reach the center of the hall where an altar stood, shaped in the guise of the Great Wheel of Magic. Levitating above its hub was the Staff of Volans, the Staff of the Patriarchs. The first contender to lay his hands on the staff would have his powers immediately amplified by the ancient artifact. At that point, the other wizard normally surrendered, if he knew it was good for him. Anything was allowed to stop the opponent from approaching the altar, and in the past, there had been fatalities among the contestants. Sorry, all this background is so busy, it's very difficult for me to actually see it. The position of challenger was still empty. Thyrus' opponent was late. Maybe the upstart is scared, thought the Patriarch. The 3 opponents he had defeated were all masters of their own order, while this Bathsazar Gelt was just a young alchemist. A promising one, though. Thyrus had witnessed his brilliance progress through the selections of the positions of challenger, but gold wizards had never struck Thyrus as great warriors. The main tactic when fighting them was to keep a reasonable distance to stay out of reach of their touch. Failure in doing so could result in being turned into a gold statue, and Thyrus had other plans for the future. Finally, the challenger walked into the hall through the gold entrance. The gate was immediately sealed behind him. Thyrus examined his young opponent and realized immediately that there was no trace of hesitation within him. He could not see the face of Bathsazar Gelt of the mask he always wore, but could clearly understand from the posture of his robed body and from his resolute stride that the gold wizard was not there to lose. Balthazar Gelt assumed his codified position 8 steps in front of the gold wall and stood ready. After the preparatory ritual, silence fell in the hall and tension began to build. The challenger had to take the first step towards the hub, thus starting the duel. Balthazar moved in. A gesture, a few words of power, and a golden light surrounded him. The young wizard suddenly melted into a pool of liquid that zigzagged towards the altar. Thyrus laughed and formulated a counterspell, while summoning the mystic crimson bands to hold his opponent. When he saw the gold wizard trapped, Thyrus cast a second spell. He immediately enveloped fiery wings and lifted him into the air towards the staff. A surge of golden energy vaporized the bands. Then, suddenly, Thyrus crashed to the floor with a scream. The robe of the bright wizard, his wide mantle, and everything he was carrying had suddenly turned to lead. Balthazar started to walk towards the altar. In a split second, the body of Thyrus was enveloped in intense flames and quickly melted the lead, and the patriarch was back on his feet. A scarlet scimitar, the concrete manifestation of Thyrus's anger, materialized in the air and streaked towards Balthazar. The scimitar was met in mid-flight by a burnished gauntlet, similarly conjured, and the two spells canceled each other out in a flash. Next, Balthazar fought back, and a golden cage imprisoned the red wizard. Thyrus felt mocked by the refusal of his opponent to use offensive spells, and a ray of intense heat erupted from his outstretched hand. The fiery energy carved a great hole into the cage and hurled towards the gold wizard. Balthazar raised his left-gloved hand, and the beam was stopped by a shimmering golden shield. Thyrus kept up the pressure, and the ray focused to a very thin lance of red energy. Balthazar's shield was growing dimmer under the attack, and he obviously could not resist much longer. The right hand of the gold wizard rose and glowed for an instant with no apparent effect. The patriarch was triumphant. Soon the challenger would have to surrender or be turned into a pile of charred bones. Then Thyrus suddenly realized something strange was happening to his legs. He felt a sensation of icy cold darkness starting to spread up his lower limbs. Thyrus had interrupted the attack. He looked down. With terror, he realized his body was in the process of turning into gold. How was it possible? He had not been touched unless his own heat ray. The ray established a contact between the two wizards. The cursed Balthazar must have channeled the gold energy along Thyrus's own spell. For a second, the patriarch was in the grasp of sheer panic. Such skill, such control. Then his warrior spirit took over once more, and he directed all of his fiery energies in a desperate attempt to stop the transmutation. He concentrated on the cold feeling of the metal and fought back with all the fire in his veins. After a difficult struggle, the patriarch managed to stop the gold energy at his waist. He raised his head again just in time to see Balthazar now only a few yards from the altar. With his legs still paralyzed, the patriarch raised an arm and invoked the most powerful defensive spell of his order. A great wall of fire appeared between Balthazar and the altar. The creation stretched from one wall of the vast chamber to the other and reached the vaulted ceiling. Thyrus directed all of his remaining energies in raising its temperature, and soon the barrier was burning white with heat. No living creature could go through without being destroyed. The two wizards had reached a stalemate, it seemed. Thyrus could not move and could not lose his concentration to keep up the wall. Balthazar was at an arm's length of the staff, but he could not reach it. The patriarch was thinking hard. He had done a very short time to find a solution. Then, once more, he witnessed the impossible. Was it an arm of solid gold that reached through the firewall and grasped the staff? The bright light of his spell made it difficult to see clearly, and then it was all over. The chamber was filled by a flash of golden light that dazzled the masters in their shielded alcoves. When they could see again, Balthazar was standing in the center of the hall, the staff firmly in his hands, and in front of him was a golden statue. Only the eyes and mouth of the patriarch were still flesh. The calm voice of Balthazar echoed in their minds. Thyrus Gorman, you forgot the essence of metal is in equal parts stone and fire. This has caused your defeat. I could take your life now, but the Empire needs your powers against the enemies it has. Your order requires your leadership, and I would rather have you as a friend. Do you recognize my authority? You won the duel in a fair fight. You are our supreme patriarch now, and you will have my respect and my loyalty until we meet here again in 8 years. I'll be ready, Gorman, answered Balthazar. I'll be ready. Now, this is an interesting look into a character because the things we glean from these two stories, obviously he came out fresh off a boat after tricking people with fake money, got into the school, displayed obvious discipline and skill when it came to metallurgy and then the actual magic of metals, which we would know as Chaman, right? That's the wind of magic. In Age of Sigmar has been blown up into its entire realm, but we get this sense that there's a higher purpose and an honor behind him. He's not diminutive. He doesn't want to rule over people. It's not about pride or arrogance. He wants his opponent to live because in this Wizards duel format that they have, you always kill the best competitors. And he's like, no, I don't want that. We need a guy like you who can throw fireballs and stuff like, and these big flame walls. He's an exceptional wizard and leader, to get there. And I like this dynamic they have where it's like, I respect you and your power. They make it very clear in the last thing, in 8 years, I'm going to come for that title again. And like, cool, I like it, but they have this healthy work respect for one another. And this is really a cool thing to see. We don't, as far as I can remember, I don't remember seeing anything like this in AOS where magic travels along other magic. So the idea behind the metal wizards is just don't get close to them. If they can't touch you, they can't transmute you, you're fine. The caveat being is that this fireball or missile, whatever spell he had, created a link between them, and that was kind of hijacked by Bathsazar Gelt. And that's an interesting thing. Now, I did mention Balthazar Gelt shows up in Age of Sigmar, and so this is where we're going to enter into spoiler territory. But it's for a book that's been out for a couple years, and honestly, it doesn't spoil the plot or anything. In the book Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds, which was kind of the main overarching novel for that chapter of Age of Sigmar, when Nagash had the Necroquake and it was all ascendant and that kind of thing. One of the characters we met in that story was a guy named Balthas. He was a Stormcast Eternal. He was quite a high-ranking part of the Sacrosanct Chamber, specifically dealing with studying magics. He was denoted as being an incredibly inquisitive and very creative in terms of how he uses the quote-unquote technology of magic, right? He was just very intuitive and understood specifically how to bend metal magics to his will. Now, one of the side stories that we get from there is a few things. One, never takes off his helmet, which is very much like this boy here, who is just always seen with the implacable metal face. No emotion, nothing like that. He gets lost in his work quite a bit, but there's a sub-story about Balthas that matches Balthazar Gelt perfect, and that is to say, one time this Sacrosanct Chamber of Stormcast was sent to go fight a whole bunch of brigands and thieves and that kind of stuff who were defending a bunch of gold. Now, the normal mission would have been, okay, we're going to surround them, deplete them, besiege them, and then we'll go in at some point when we have an opening and just kill everybody. That's how Stormcast do. A lot of basic military actions. But what Balthas did in that moment was used his knowledge of metal magics, essentially, and he turned all of the gold that they were hoarding into lead, into dust, just crap, whatever metal they didn't have a value for, right? Just scrap iron. Instead of trying to encircle and defeat the enemy in the military sense, he defeated them by removing all the things that they had to fight for. And so that made him a very creative general when it came to initiating combat. That Balthas essentially shut off any motivation they have to fight, and they capitulated very, very quickly, because at that point you have worthless metal in your vaults, you're surrounded by an army that is bent on your extinction, and he basically won the battle without having to sacrifice really any troops. And while we have cool stories here of someone turning, worthless things into gold, the reverse is also equally devastating against many, many factions. You turn something that they value into something worthless, and you can watch the entire motivation of an army fall apart. Side note, in Age of Sigmar, I have no idea how this applies to something like Urgold for the Fire Slayers. I imagine, in this, it makes it seem like it's very temporary. I imagine it was probably temporary in that story too. It didn't have to be, scrap metal for very long, just enough to break the spirits of the people they were attacking. But we get that same sense of a Lord, not Veritant. What's the name of the guy? There's so many different Stormcast heroes, guys. I'm sorry. Whatever the Lord wizard is from the Sacrosanct Chamber, that's what Balthazar was. And we get that same sense from here. He also was found in Shyish. We know that. So he would have been a spirit of innumerable age, probably pulled from the old world. Nagash had him in Shyish locked away. Sigmar comes in, takes the soul of Bathsazar Gelt, sorry about that, I bumped my mic, and reforges him into a mighty hero of the Stormcast. And honestly, I like that. I would not mind if more heroes of this ilk, where there's some story beats to them, some depth to make them interesting, but not like, they're not a seminal figure like Sigmar himself. Those kinds of things, those kinds of characters getting added as Stormcast are awesome. Like, why don't we have a Luther Huss version kind of a thing? I don't know. But all in all, cool stories surrounding him there. And when I read the Soul Wars section, I was like, that sounds like a character that's familiar. And then I saw online that someone had mentioned Bathsazar Gelt, and reading the stories, you're like, oh yeah, that's clearly him. The only thing I don't like about this story is the picture in the background made it exceptionally difficult to read from my particular angle. And honestly, I went ahead and read the arcane lore discussing characters and stuff like that. It's really just a long way to saying, we made characters worse and cheaper so you guys could have bigger armies surrounding them. And it's like, well, that's fair. That's how they sell models. The only thing notable that I wanted to point out here is that this picture is super, super meaningful to me in a nostalgia sense, because my first models I ever owned when I was older playing fantasy battles were the High Elves. I played the High Elves because they came in the, the Island of Blood set or whatever. But also, my first ever kit of models was these old dumpy Chaos Warriors. I never liked the minis. They're just always so scrunched up and hunched forward. They look kind of derpy. I mean, they're amazing. Like, nostalgia out the nose, awesome. But yeah, so they had the old Chaos Warriors. My grandmother picked them up at a store because it was going out of business. And she was like, oh, Doug likes models. But I was thinking like military history models, and they were on sale. So she grabbed me a box of Chaos Warriors and what I now know are some kind of Bretonnian Knight. So anyway, just a little fun thing there for you. Now, finishing out this issue before we move into another one here for our next Wild Reforging, we have vehicle design by Living Fossil and international sex symbol Jervis Johnson up here in the top left. You can see them here. Look at that thumbs up. That's a guy who knows what he's talking about. And essentially, they just gave you these little cool templates. This is a very famous one where it's a land speeder made out of a stick of deodorant with some other extra bits thrown on here and there. Just kind of fun stuff like that, but where you can design your own rules. And I love this. The most important rule. As I've already mentioned, one of the primary aims of this article is to allow players to use models they have scratch built or converted themselves. They are not designed to allow players to plonk down a cardboard box and say something along the lines of, this box represents a vehicle, what I came up with last night. So the most important rule is that a vehicle a player has designed himself must be represented by a painted what you see is what you get WYSIWYG, so that acronym goes back a long time, or it cannot be used at all. So I like whenever, rules where you can kind of make up your own thing are created, people immediately love to go to like, well, this is how I can break it in game terms. But Games Workshop, at least back then, and I think many other games nowadays, are very much, there is a line between do whatever you want and only sticking to the product line of models. Like, it's not unreasonable to say to someone, you need to put in a little bit of effort, unless you're just playtesting or something like that. But if you want to use, your stick of deodorant as a mini, put some work in. And I love the fact that they were just not afraid to say that. Of like, yeah, they have 3 paragraphs here expanding on that point of what you see, what you get means. You're probably not going to see this in standard games, but hey, we're here to have fun and allow you to make whatever models you want. I like that. And honestly, it functions a lot like the, Anvil of Apotheosis, the character creator for Age of Sigmar is, where you pick a type of vehicle, its size, which would correlate roughly into how many points of glory do you want to spend on your hero to give him a mount or something like that. His armor, his speed is calculated based on all these things. You pick its weapons, its characteristics, and you go from there, and then you have to work out its point value, and they have a little kind of updated thing here. So in this one, they took I believe it's the Dark Eldar Flying Gun, the Rampage, which is, heck yeah, dude. It's basically a Dark Elf Raider. This is the old Raider before they came out with the nice, sexy, sleek one they have now. and they just made it a giant gunboat, which is, I feel like they've made things like that for them since, but a cool way to go back in time and see what was possible. For vehicle types, walkers, tanks, vehicles, which I'm sure would be something like walkers make sense. That's very clear. Type is the different types of vehicles printed. Okay, here we go. The one thing I'm having trouble with is vehicle as a vehicle type summary, right? That's the one that's kind of getting me. I understand walkers, tanks, and flyers, and it has rules for the other ones, but not so much vehicles. Oh, I see. Maybe it means light vehicle. If we look over here, it has a few, like a chart here. So walkers, tanks, light vehicles, which I understand being a subtype, like speeders and stuff like that. Flyers and immobile. Okay. Next, you pick a size for it. Small, normal, and war machine. So war machines would be anything that's particularly large. Okay, pick your armor type, and it looks like this is mostly going to be about trying to capture what you want the thing to be. So there's not really a whole lot of downsides to picking a heavy armor one, although I'm sure it will make your thing more expensive. Work out the speed based on all of those things. Let's see, most vehicles are about 6 inches, and it looks like it goes from there. So, and then if you're a walker, you have bonuses to firing all your weapons. You don't take a penalty because you're more stable, kind of a thing. I like that. That's an interesting concept. Let me look over here. Weapons upgrade chart, which I think these are like terms or special weapon rules that I don't think exist necessarily anymore, but like Gatling, I know twin linked is one, and basically it just increases the cost of the weapon. So if we look at a melt-a-gun, and it's based upon what you want your ballistic skill, so how good you are at shooting, your to hit roll, so to speak. If you had it twin linked, it would increase the cost of that. So if I wanted a ballistic skill 3, which is pretty good, right? No, ballistic skill 4 would be the best one, right? Yeah, it would be. Sorry, I'm all turned around. Addition melt in my brain. So if I had a melt-a-gun, it would be 15. If I wanted it to be twin linked, it would add 50% to this cost, which would make it 21, I think, something like that. 21 or 22. I'm not sure which one. I'm not sure how it rounds. I'm not going to worry about adding it all together and learning it all. But yes, so you can have weapons that cost an obscene amount of money. I mean, it really is a chance to go nuts. Of course, you have basic weapons here, which would be things for like Imperial vehicles, Dark Eldar, Chaos specific ones, Necrons, Orcs, all that kind of deal. The Orc ones are interesting because they don't typically cost a lot. Actually, they don't have really any cost here. Oh, I see. It's because they don't exist. You can't have orcs at a ballistic skill 4 or 3, just 2. So those are your only options. That's interesting. I like that quite a bit. Whereas the Eldar ones, because they've been firing, oh, and the Necrons too, because they've been battling for millennia, all of their troops are actually better than ballistic skill 2, so you can't take those. That's kind of a fun thing. They give you some cool, let's see. Okay, and this explains the special weapon rules. So like I knew twin linked, but it also gives you the rules for like mega weapons, Gatling guns, that kind of thing. Close combat. I can't fathom building a vehicle and outside of a walker like a dreadnought and caring about close combat whatsoever, but it is what it is. I love their conversion stuff here with like they used guitar wire, like guitar strings. If you don't know, they have these little ridges. You can use those to make really cool detail effects at scale. There's also chained up with jewelry chains to make it the right size. There's some neat things here. Work out the characteristics. So this is basically when you're filling out the rest of the unit entry. And I'm sure it has to do, the next thing you do is work out the record vehicle. Let's see. Yeah, it's basically just writing out all the different stats that you're missing at this point based on your choices. So like if you have a vehicle that's open topped, you'll have different rules, say to a tank. And then you have a summary sheet that basically condenses all this into a 2-page spread, which is really nice. I enjoy this because I feel like the early pages are all about conveying what the concept you're trying to do is. Like all these things are just long-winded details, thanks Jervis, of what are you trying to do? What are you shooting for? And then you have your hard copy pages of like, this is the nuts and bolts of how it all goes together. So I'm like, heck yeah. And of course, a lot of their stuff is just generated by what faction they're a part of. Of course, not all factions are represented. That would be a massive undertaking nowadays, but yeah, just general stuff. Humans, so that would be any non-Space Marine thing. Space Marines is its own jam. But when you get into stuff like Tyranids, they don't have vehicles per se, but they would want to have some kind of equivalent. Adeptus Titanicus. That is an interesting thing right there. Let me see. Wouldn't Titanicus be knights? I feel like they should be bigger than that, right? Weapon skill 4, all in all, it just kind of, the only thing I'm really not seeing is how many hull points. I mean, I guess it depends on the edition. Maybe this is an edition I'm not familiar with, where the hull points are worked out. Let's see, strength, initiative, attacks. I see the armor. Yeah, it's the only thing I'm missing here is what the actual hull points, because usually you have to go through the armor to start doing damage to the hull, but that might be, I might be thinking of a different edition. Let me know if you remember. Then we have our damage table, so what happens as they become crippled over games, which is just kind of an add-on thing. Structure points. War machines are so large they can absorb damage. So, okay, these are from real big things. Oh, never mind. And Appendix 2, this is specifically for flyers. I'm not going to get into the weeds about that, but the idea of vehicle creation, pretty stinking cool. I'd love to see more of that. And in addition to Bathsazar Gelt, the Supreme Patriarch, the Luther Huss, the Prophet of Sigmar, this issue resounds with the noise of marching boots. As the eagerly anticipated Empire Greatswords and Empire Artillery, this is the introduction of those models, which we still have many of. I still have some great swords on my shelf. They still hold up. They are still a banger of a kit, I think. The only thing I'm not a big fan of is really their leg posing. I feel like they could have stronger stances, but then again, this is back in the day when they were ranked up. Cannons and stuff like that, I don't think those are really around all that much anymore. And we kind of end up by them showing off a whole bunch of products that are coming. Isn't this so fun to look back in history and see clan rats that are somehow older than dirt? Some cool looks at some of the old green skin models. Here they have sort of a Tale of Four Warlords thing here in the back. But what's so fun is just seeing how big armies are. Now, this is a huge pro in my mind when it comes to other games that are no longer 40k or Games Workshop, to be honest, centric, where the size of an army, I'm going to put quotes around that, is closer to like 30 something models versus like 70. Because let's see, what's the most numerous thing here? We have, well, here's a whole bunch of Black Templars, which is a newer book that's awesome. And a lot of cheaper troops here. 1, 2, that's 8, 13, 14, 24, 29, 37, 38 models for the entire thing, and with that you get a whole swath of heroes, jump packs, a dreadnought. Over here, for comparison purposes, we have white scars, it looks like. And that's going to be a mix of dreadnoughts, bikes. Is that a tank? Dreadnought. Oh, it's a Razorback. There we go. But yeah, I mean, that's 1, 2, 21 models. And that's a good swath for an army, for a 1,000-point army. Are you kidding me? That sounds so glorious. That must be so nice. Over here we have, I think, one of our more numerous ones. So this is a whole Psyker war host for, I mean, this just seems like kicking someone in the dick with magic power compared to all the rest of these. Maybe the Chaos guys won't turn tail so badly, but was it 1, 2, 16, 17, 21, 22? This is 48 models, and it's just because it's all dude spam. It's a bunch of heroes with one uber unit of Black Guardians, and then there's a smaller one next to it. But like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. 1,000 points for that many dudes. Oh, I love it. I miss it. And it's a huge thing that I put in favor of games like Conquest, or even, I mean, War Machine and Hordes was the same way. You don't have a ton of guys, so you can put more thought into them. And so I can invest in a 1,000-point army over here, the Strike Force Kublai, and I don't have to have like a vault, worth of space to be able to hold an army. I like that. I miss those days, to be honest with you. And then they go through their big mega battle as they did this all. Oh, look, there's prices here in the back. This is all USD. This is so cute. Oh, look at that. Savage Orc Shaman. I have 2 of these for $8. Aw, a Chariot for 22. It's just enough to make your heart bleed. And then here's some model kits from, the various things. I didn't realize they sold models individually like this, like the Bergman's Bearman of Urslo, $325 each. Well, if you want to have a 10-man unit, if you're talking $30 for a unit, it's not bad in today's money. Very pricey back then, especially when they're all metal. But yeah, here's our Dogs of War stuff that we recovered in the last video. And that will just about do it. They had some specific bits and that kind of thing you could order. I think mostly in support of the various, what do you call them? Kit bashes for vehicles. But what's interesting here is right at the end, it says previously unreleased Adeptus Mechanicus miniature set with Forge World resin cast symbol. Now, what's interesting to me is that these models are freaking awesome. But I'm curious if maybe they were supposed to have the rules, like not Titanicus, but Adeptus Mechanicus for the vehicle creation. I would have no idea. But anyway, friends, that is the completion of issue 251 of the White Dwarf. I hope you enjoyed this while you're reforging and you got some painting in, you had a good time hanging out, listening to some stories and nostalgia of days of yore. Thank you so much. Please leave me all your feedback regarding these kinds of videos in the comments down below, or at least just click a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind before the video ends, and it would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening. I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.